I'd like to talk to you today about a new book that I've just published called U.S.-Latin American Relations, which is published by Prager Publishers of Westport, Connecticut. Actually, this is the fourth edition of U.S.-Latin American Relations, which goes back to the first edition that I published in the early 1980s. This continues my ongoing work trying to determine the various aspects of our relations with the Latin American states. The book primarily accents the role of the United States, historically, institutionally, and from a policy perspective. Let me just give you a little bit of an idea of how the book is structured, and then we'll go into some of the issues that are associated with the current character of U.S.-Latin American relations. The first part of the book is an historical movement from the early days in which the United States got hold of Florida from the Spanish and developed the Monroe Doctrine, which is our first major Latin American policy statement in which the United States pledged to protect the hemisphere from foreign intervention. So that first chapter takes us through a number of events: the Mexican-American War, the Civil War era, in which the United States participated very little in many of the events in the hemisphere, all the way up until the Spanish-American War, in which we moved the Spanish out of the hemisphere, gave independence to Cuba, but eventually pretty much controlled Cuban foreign policy and domestic policy. The second chapter deals with the era in which we intervened extensively in Latin America, the so-called Big Stick era of President Teddy Roosevelt, where we intervened in Mexico, Dominican Republic, Nicaragua, Haiti, and a number of other places in order to influence events and to advance, as Woodrow Wilson would say, civilization and make good democracies and good people of the Latin Americans. Kind of obviously a very arrogant position, but one in which the United States felt very firmly that it should follow. The third chapter brings us into the more modern era, the post-Cold War era, in which the United States was primarily occupied with the Cuban Revolution, which occurred in 1959, and developed policies to a large extent to ensure that communism would not spread. There was an intervention in the Dominican Republic. There was the successful attempts to bring down Che Guevara in Bolivia. There was the period in which the United States did not have any normalization of relations with Cuba, and eventually we move into the era of the Central American Wars, in which Ronald Reagan funded the Contras, the so-called freedom fighters who were against the spread of communism in Nicaragua and El Salvador. We bring it up to date at the very end by talking about I guess the period can be best described in the Bush, Clinton, and Bush era as the expansion of trade in the region. The NAFTA agreement, the onset of what has often been called globalization, and George Bush's many efforts to try to increase trade with the individual Latin American countries by having separate trade agreements. After this historical analysis, which covers about a third of the book, I then move into an area that I call the institutional participants, which means all the various major players that participate in the making of United States foreign policy. The first section deals with the government participants, the President, the Congress, the various agencies that are there: United States Treasury, Border Control and Enforcement, the Drug Enforcement Agency, the United States Military, the United States Treasury, a whole host of major participants at the governmental level that have some impact on the way foreign policy towards Latin America is developed. Obviously, the President of the United States is a key player in the development of United States foreign policy in the region. What's interesting, and many people say unfortunate, is that the United States presidents throughout the modern era, post-World War II era, have not paid much attention to Latin America except during a particular crisis like the onset of Fidel Castro and his communist revolution. But presidents have generally put Latin America on the back burner, have paid little attention to it, saw it as a place that could be a wonderful opportunity for U.S. investment and trade, but really not pay the kind of attention that the United States does to China, as an example, or obviously the Middle East or Europe. And so when we talk about the institutional participants, it is within the backdrop of United States placing Latin America as a governmental role in a much lesser capacity. The second chapter deals with what I call the informal participants, those participants that are not directly connected to the United States government but play a very active role. We would probably best describe them as lobbyists or trade organizations or institutions that in some way are not related to government but have an active role in trying to influence United States policy in the region. The Council on Foreign Relations, the Cuban lobbies, the Hispanic lobbies, the public relations firms, some of the human rights organizations, of which there are very, very many in Latin America, think tanks, and the general media that are out there. There's a range of these participants, hundreds of them, who are daily trying to influence Congress, trying to influence the president, trying to influence the bureaucratic establishment to try to achieve certain objectives, whether it is increased trade, whether it is human rights concerns, whether it is advancing the image of a particular nation, whether it is just strictly business opportunities, of which there are many available in this new globalized Latin America. So we talk about that, and as I say, it's very important to see the rise and fall, or the influence of some and the lack of influence of others. The Hispanic lobby, as an example, seems to be growing dramatically in recent years as a major player as the Hispanic population in the United States grows significantly. And so, as I say, that becomes the second chapter, and it is an increasingly important one as we have many more of these lobbying and trade organizations trying to get government to advance their cause. The third deals with what I call the external participants, the United Nations, the International Monetary Fund, the individual governments such as Canada and China, the World Trade Organization. International organizations, sometimes called multilateral organizations, but also individual countries that have a special interest. The European Union, as I mentioned, along with China and Canada, seem to be major players along with the United States in terms of trying to gain a foothold in Latin America as far as trade and aid and investment, but also seem to be competing very effectively as the United States turns its attention to the Middle East, Europe, and other countries. The Chinese are very, very active because they're interested in Latin America's oil. They're interested in many of the natural resources that are there. Canada has played kind of a human rights and humanitarian role there. And of course, as I say, these international organizations, United Nations, the World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, are constantly providing assistance and direction and development projects to the Latin American countries, which are, many of them are in desperate need of assistance and financial help. Then the book moves to the final section, but in many respects the most important section, and that is to take a look at some of the key issues and controversies and policy directions that the United States is moving in Latin America in the current era. We start out with a chapter that I call the immigration puzzle. And as many people are aware of in the United States, the immigration issue is an enormously controversial and divisive issue. But it is also obviously generating or coming from the movement of people in Central America and the Caribbean, and to a certain extent in South America. A lot of movement, quite obviously, from Mexico, but also from Central America and from countries like the Dominican Republic and Haiti in the Caribbean. There have been major debates that have been conducted in the United States, both within the political parties and in and in Congress over how the United States should respond to the presence of illegal immigrants, which may be as many as 12 million illegal immigrants in the United States at the present time.